polar opposite, so to speak, of a talk about an orbiting observatory, which is motivated in part by some events that were in the news. You may remember back in April, there was actually a convention in England, I believe it was in England, a convention of people who advocate the view that the Earth is actually not a globe, but is in fact flat in some sense. And so that's kind of the motivation here to examine this a little more closely. What the heck is going on in the 21st century when we have people who are enamored of this idea, maybe for reasons we can understand and maybe for reasons that are beyond us. So to explore that a little bit, a difficult task, I asked my good friend Peter Sobol. Peter has spoken here at Space Place many times. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, he was Space Place's first speaker when we started many years ago. But Peter is a historian of science who, among his many specialties, includes the history of pseudoscience and the occult. So I guess the flat Earth kind of falls into that bin. So anyway, I hope you'll help me welcome Peter to hear about this business.
You get pictures like this after the moon landing. So Shenton is hard-pressed to explain these things. At one point he said, well, that's not the Earth, it's just something else out there. At another point he said it looks spherical because of the curvature of space-time, which is he picked up from reading something about Einstein, I suppose. And eventually he had to go where people usually go with this and say it's a conspiracy and a fraud. A great delusion were his words. Now, another thing happens. In Canada, there's a philosopher named Leo Ferrari and some poets, and they decide that the authority that science now has over us is crimping our imagination and not allowing us to really have a picture of nature that we really should be allowed to have. What's the point of escaping from the oppressive authority of religion after all those centuries to now be pressed down by the authority of science? So as kind of a joke, they start the Flat Earth Society of Canada. Not because they believe the Earth is flat, but because they want to argue against everybody's what they see as kowtowing to scientific authority. In their own words, they said they wanted to irritate the establishment. They want to restore man's confidence in the validity of his own perceptions. They're fighting for the epistemological rights of the individual. Members of our society have the audacity to believe what we see. And Ferrari says at one place, sanity is a narrow, rationalistic outlook and a dreary, sterile state of mind. Mankind was happier when it was prepared to make its peace with the unknown. I think that the fact that these were poets meant that maybe we're dealing with the two worlds of CP Snow here, and they didn't know any scientists. And they didn't understand what kind of passion scientists and astronomers bring to their work. But it attracted a lot of members, and you never really know whether these people are joining because they believe it or because it's a lark. Maybe some people join these societies in the same way that some of us pick up the weekly world news at the checkout counter just for a yuck to see what's in there. That's Farley Mowat, the famous Canadian nature writer on the left, and that's Eugene Ionesco, the absurdist playwright. I guess his most famous play is The Bald Soprano, about how banal daily life can get. And maybe he joined because he thought that science was making us all banal. I don't really know. Meanwhile, after Shenton dies, his papers go half to the Science Fiction Foundation and half to a fellow he had corresponded with out in California named Charles Kenneth Johnson, who had been an aircraft mechanic and a flat earther from early in his life, finally decided to bag it all and go out and live in a trailer in the Mojave with his wife and run the Flat Earth Research, what does he, the International Flat Earth Research Society, and publishes the Flat Earth News. He believed that Columbus had discovered that the earth was flat. His sailors, according to Johnson, believed that the earth was round, and as they sailed along, the ocean would sort of fall away from beneath their ship, and the ship would keep going. He referred to believers in the round earth as falling for what he called satanic greaseball science. He did have a biblical basis for his belief, although he tried to keep it in the background. He couldn't figure out, he tried to contact the Canadian Society. They didn't write back to him. I guess they saw that he was serious and they were just doing it to make this philosophical point. But he didn't want to have anything to do with the Creation Research Institute, the anti-evolution group that had cropped up, because, of course, they believed the earth was round. It harks back to Voliva's claim about the gnat of evolution and the camel of the global earth. He believed that George Washington had known the earth was flat. He also believed that FDR and Stalin and Winston Churchill also knew the earth was flat, and that they were going to reveal this fact. They had intended to reveal this fact to the world after World War II. And he knows this because the United Nations picked this as their emblem. But for some reason they decided not to make this revelation. Johnson found this hard work to maintain. Of course, discoveries and space travel are happening all the time now, and more discoveries, making it very difficult to claim that the earth is flat unless you're willing to call many things conspiracies. It got to the point where Johnson asked Shadowald if he would take over running his society, knowing very well that Shadowald was not a believer. But Shadowald may have been one of the only sympathetic people at that point that Johnson really knew. So, the April conference in England seems to be harking back to the Canadian Society's view that what we're talking about here is what might be called the epistemological sovereignty of the individual. That I can think about nature any way I want, and I don't have to take on faith anything that you tell me. And if I go out and look around out of my trailer in the Mojave Desert and it looks flat to me, then it's flat. And there was, I guess, some musician who tried to get some fame out of this, who goes by the name of B.O.B. with dots after it, who got some speed on the internet for saying, don't just believe what I say, research what I say. And I think it's pretty clear that we don't need to do that if we know anything about the history. I'll take questions when I
Okay.
So what to make of all this? I think there are some lessons to be learned here. The first one is about the interpretation of holy books. These Victorians were frightened away from the Augustinian approach to exegesis. And certainly my evangelical Christian friends are not there right now. They all understand that the earth is round. They all pretty much believe that evolution occurred, although they believe it was theistically guided. I'm not sure that we'll ever know what did it. I mean, back in the early centuries of Christianity, there was also this disparity, this distribution of attitudes toward pagan knowledge, and maybe these people were just evincing the same attitude in the Victorian era. But it can have been hard to ignore the animosity coming from the warfare thesis and the threat proposed by Darwin. I don't know that anyone was ever converted by being made to believe that the earth is actually flat, and that therefore the other important parts of the Bible are also true, but maybe so. lesson here is for historians, and I'm looking at you, David Borston, author of The Discoverers, that was published in 1980-something, where he continues this flat error. You've got to go back and look at your sources, especially if it's something that matters to you. If you really want to slam the Middle Ages and you're knowingly doing it, you know very well that there were people in the Middle Ages who believed the earth was round, and all you talk about are the people who thought it was flat. You are exceedingly dishonest. And we can't have that in history. We can't have that in science either. Another skein that comes out of this is the zetetic suspicion of authority, and anxiousness to sort of irritate the establishment. And again, I think these people don't really know any scientists, or at least they weren't paying attention to the sigh that went up from CERN when the Higgs boson was discovered. I mean, great, there it is, but that's still the standard model. Come on, let's have some fun here. Let's find something new that forces us to rethink this whole thing. That would really energize people. To find the thing that you expect to see there is kind of dull for scientists. Who was it that said, scientists don't like to hear eureka, they like to hear, that's funny. And that brings me to the last thread of this, which is this zetetic idea that the sovereignty, the epistemological sovereignty of the individual, which first of all was never really adhered to by the people in the 19th century who called themselves zetetics, who were quite happy to rely upon single reports of a lunar eclipse when the sun and the moon were both above the horizon to argue for a flat Earth. Or this idea that somebody once saw the pole star when they were 20 degrees south of the equator. They were quite happy to trust the reports of other people when it served their purpose. But in a larger sense, there's something not helpful and maybe even dangerous today to assert this sort of sovereignty over your belief. We live in a time when it's more important than ever that we understand what's going on the earth. And if you are not motivated to learn this stuff and feel compelled to dismiss it because it would be too difficult for you to learn it, and then assert that what you know is just as valid as what experts know. If you are willing to do what some creationists in Texas do, and they call it standing up to the experts. Yeah, sure, experts can be snooty, and they can look down on people who don't know as much as they do. But even people who believe in the sovereignty of their epistemology probably want to go get their gallbladder removed by someone who's done it before and fly in a plane piloted by someone who has done it before and built by someone who understands aerodynamics. So I don't know what we can do about that, but I hope that it is a passing fad and that the round earth convinces more and more people that this is an actual fact. So with that, I will close, and thank you for your attention. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I came to this meeting tonight because
I thought I might get someone here from your society.
I'm not from the society.
Oh, you're not? Oh, I'm sorry.
See, one of the things I would like to correct in your presentation is that the Flat Earth Society is controlled opposition. It's not what flat earthers actually believe. So there are very valid reasons to believe in a flat earth. And yeah, so simply put, if nobody...
You're not from the society?
No.
Okay.
I'm one of
what they do.
I'm one of a lot of people that are realizing that the earth, there is no curvature or spin. So if, and I have $1,000 challenge here for anybody that can show me that Marshall Park in Middleton is 21.6 feet lower than Warner Park in Madison, because that's what your curvature formula says it should be if it's a ball that's 24,901 miles in circumference. So I have, if anybody's interested in doing that, if they want to show me, I have my information here if you want to go ahead and do that. Because just think, did you know that Warner Park is supposed to be 20 feet lower than Marshall Park? That sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Do you believe that curve is there?
If there were no such things as hills or
No,
glaciers that push
over
dirt around
the
or-
lake. Water is supposed to be curving with the earth, right? Like the ocean would do if it was a ball.
Oh,
So-
well, that's why we don't need to have locks.
How can you can see Chicago 40
You know what a
miles
lock
across
is?
like miles.
What a lock is
Can
for
I
a boat?
can I just make a
Sure.
point here? This is
Look,
this is concerning.
I'm sure that there are people here who will approach you later, and
Okay.
if they are interested in taking up your chapter.
Can I make some points about your flat Earth history?
Oh, sure.
Only if they're concise.
Yes.
We'd like to
And
have
The-
the judge of that.
Okay, there's 4 points, rational points, scientific points you made for considering it to be a spherical Earth, and those were Aristophanes and Aristotle's 3 points about the declination of the
Aristophanes?
Aristophanes. How do you pronounce it?
With the well.
Eratosthenes, yeah.
You're thinking of.
Forgive me, I'm not Greek. I don't speak Greek.
Yeah.
So Aristophanes, did I say it right that time?
Well, we know who
Eratosthenes.
So please proceed.
Okay.
The important thing.
Aristotle, in the declination of the pole star, eclipses, and a ship going over the horizon. All 4 of those are easily disproven, and that's why people are starting to wonder. And also, the Bedford Levels experiment proves it's flat, and that's where my $1,000 challenge comes from, is to show me that Lake Mendota is curving 21.6 feet from one end to
You
the
must
other.
then think that the space program is a total fraud.
I can show you why people are
I
questioning
don't want to
that.
see your evidence. I just want to know.
Of course.
Do you believe that the space program is a total fraud?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Satellites?
Well,
And the shadow
How-
of the Earth on the moon.
how does North America, is
No,
North
no,
America
I-
changing size?
If you would like to debate this gentleman, I'm sure he'd be willing to stay after we're done and entertain your questions. But right now, I would like to take this time to entertain other questions that the audience might have. Yes, sir.
Do you think the change from the way the Canadian flat Earth versus that American flat Earth, taking the one that sort of did it in jest versus the one and that's the guy who took it really seriously, is similar to like Pastafarians and somebody in the future genuinely believing in the flying spaghetti monster?
Except there's real evidence to support a flat Earth. The flying
No.
spaghetti monster doesn't really have that.
They're about the same.
If you
Only
won't
if
listen
you're
to
not,
evidence.
because you're not willing to suspend your disbelief to look at evidence.
Okay.
And that's the problem with
In all,
science
in
now.
all
So if you would hang
citation, I'm
on,
willing to
we'll keep it
suspend my
between the
disbelief,
speaker.
but not by the neck until death.
No,
Sorry,
I
just,
think.
just address Peter if you would.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they are the same. I don't think, the flying spaghetti monster is meant to mock a belief in other religions, whereas the Canadian Flat Earth Society, and again, I can't help but being swayed by the idea that these were poets, they had some feeling that people ought to be able to have whatever idea they want about nature, and that the authority of science was somehow oppressive, and they were hoping to fight against that. That's all I can think of. They sort of got hoist on their own petard. All of them achieved much more notoriety for their association with their society than they did for their own professional pursuits. And the poet, Alden Nolan, wrote to another member at one point saying that this is requiring way too much energy to put into a joke. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious whether the flat earthers that you were talking about thought about the moon as a disk or a sphere.
Oh, yeah. The biblically motivated ones, anyway, like I said, had to believe that the moon was self-luminous because that's what it says in the Bible. And it's a spotlight, too, moving around over the earth, kind of like something, like a chandelier, except a chandelier on a spinning arm that carries the sun and the moon around. Yeah. Not, again, it would be unfair to present all of them as having the very same idea, but most of them do seem to have believed that the sun and the moon were like spotlights. And if, yes?
Yeah, for me, I was one of the reasons I came here. I don't want to read anything about flat, because it's hard enough to learn the truth rather than trying to figure out all the different myths out there. But my biggest issue is I don't know if there's a thickness associated with the Earth, or it's a flat like a piece of paper. And if you drill down an inch, do we go to the other side? I'm not quite sure what the flat Earther, these various views of flat Earth think. I see a rock and it's three-dimensional, so I don't understand why it would be a sheet of paper instead.
Well, and I don't know the answer to that. Nothing that I ran across dealt with the depths of the Earth. It was all about explaining celestial phenomena. So I really don't know. It's a good question, I think. I mean, we do have models of the interior of the Earth in which we put our trust that are done by various sort of echo devices. We think we know that there's a liquid core that is responsible for our magnetic field, which protects us from solar radiation. I don't know how modern flat Earth people deal with that. Yes, sir?
Do the themes of like people purporting the idea of a round Earth, that being a conspiracy, does that like dovetail with this notion of intellectual sovereignty in the sense that like I'm curious what the flat earthers say is a reason to maintain the conspiracy that the Earth is round? Is it like this form of control similar to people who would be critical of religion, like saying that like religious belief or the church and these sorts of things are controlling us, wanting to control how we think and act and believe? Is a similar kind of thing going on there with this notion that there's this conspiracy? Like, I was just curious, like I couldn't quite grasp what the notion, what the motivation for maintaining the conspiracy might be, but then the topic of the intellectual sovereignty kind of like it made a little bit more sense to me.
Well, you're not alone in failing to see what possible gain there could be in a conspiracy. The religiously motivated flat Earth people seem to feel that if so long as you believe the Earth is round, then you're not really a Christian, and it's satanic. It's a form of Satanism, really, to believe the Earth is round. As far as the Canadians go, or people who insist that most of what we now believe comes from conspiracies and frauds, I've never seen a convincing explanation of who benefits from that. I really have not.
Okay, I think we will thank Peter one more time. And please join us on the 11th of December for the event for the history of the Orbiting Astronomical Observatory. Yeah.
You won't suspend it until dead?
I won't
You will look at some of it?
I'll show you.
I've got a GPS that works on orbiting satellites.
Can I show you like a couple pictures?
Okay.
Okay, so this is Chicago across Lake Michigan.
Oh, nice.
Do
Get my
this
center of
map.
gravity over the center of my
If you do that, you should be able to see it.
So I know the concept of
It's
right
because it's
Yeah, so it's just being lifted up behind the curve. That's your explanation?
Well, it's definitely
gravity is.
if you are out on the ocean,
Yeah.
you see the sun up above the horizon after astronomically.
Okay. But back to my original question, do you think there's 21.6 feet of drop across Lake Mendota?
Well, first of all, remember all the measurements are in terms of the levels. So it's kind of hard to get that.
You don't think with a laser beam you could figure that out?
also know that there's variations in lake levels. Two lakes.
It's a specific thing though, either the equation's wrong or the curvature's not there. It's one of the two things, right?
Or there's refractive index.
So you don't think you could ever conduct an experiment like the Bedford levels that would prove or disprove?
Well, I don't think it's better than
I didn't know anybody else would make that.
I mean,
they had the guy, the independent observer there saw.
yeah, there was a problem with the experiment, sure. But the experiment itself is scientifically valid. If you shine a laser or you can see a flag hanging over flat water, it proves if it's curving or not.
Check to see where
Yes, I have done specifically that test from Middleton. I've done it Lake Mills. I've done it from Sister Bay, across the bay, Green Bay, with a P900. So a Nikon P900. It's got a Okay, I'll find a curve that way.
Possibly not on something that small of a scale, because you're also getting, you're only talking a few miles at a time. You're going to get some edge effects and effectively effects of surface tension.
So what about this? So
40 miles.
right. So either it's being refracted, or you shouldn't be able to see it, or the equation is wrong. Those are like the options that are available.
In that instance, it doesn't have any consequences.
The equation is 8 inches per mile squared because it's exponential. So for the first mile, it's 8 inches, and then the second mile, it goes down 8 times 4 inches. So
Yeah, I was
32
just really
inches.
interested.
Yeah. So 8 inches, 32. This is the inches drop per mile.
I know people who work on the space.
It would have been better in feet, I guess. It's not really that useful.
Well, it does have to be there. So.
It boggles the mind more than anything ever could to believe it.
But yeah, it's just, I mean, it's weird when you stand out there and it's like you can see further than you should be able to.
Things don't work that way. They really don't.
It doesn't look like it's 40 miles away, just by the and
Well,
so.
this actually was pretty famous. Is that the same picture that?
Yeah, this is what did it for me. I live down there. I know this is what you can see. So it basically comes down to, like I said, either the curvature formula is wrong, or it's being refracted up from behind the horizon, or it's not the size of the ball they say it is. Those are really the only options I can find. But that's
Or you have effects on small distances that are more significant than the curvature of the Earth, which is more noticeable on the grand scale.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be curving equally? Like, at some
Uh,
scale, like,
Oh yeah, you're saying it's not curving the same over the lake.
he's saying
I'm saying
it's curving
that-
a lot over the ocean where it's hidden from us.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there are other things in play with an enclosed body of water that are over in a small scale, like 40 miles, compared to the size of the Earth. You get a lot of.
If you were to test if there was a curvature of the Earth or not, how would you test it?
No, it was tested on larger scales than 10 miles or 40 miles. I tested on
That's just one
over distances of thousands, hundreds or
But
thousands
you
of
can't
miles.
see that far.
You're not an
Why
Egyptian,
not?
you're not
Because
part
of
this process,
perspective.
and yet you found out about it somehow. Somebody
So
knows
I have
somebody's
a
making this public.
thing.
Okay, but if you're higher up and you use a telescope, you ought to be able to see as far as you want if the Earth is flat.
Well, as far as
Go up on a balloon with a telescope.
Well,
Suggest in the summer because it's,
this is what a balloon at 121,000 feet looks like.
Sometimes it feels like the helots don't want us to know.
Who?
The helots.
Oh, I've not heard of the helots.
so because I know I've seen images on that side that are a lot more curved than this.
A lot of people use a fisheye lens. They did on a Red Bull jump. They put a fisheye lens on the outside, but in the cockpit, look out the cockpit. It's flat as a pancake.
Because there are a lot of things you could be talking about.
Yeah. Okay. And
I
so,
mean, if you listen to Adam Savage on his 70,000 feet trip up over on the U2, he was like, I can see the curvature of the Earth. He was very adamant about
What was
that.
that?
Adam Savage, Mythbusters, he took a
You could exercise your.
it wasn't about the curvature of the
That's
earth.
not what I'm
This
talking
thing was about,
That means
they were doing a
nothing.
thing on
It has nothing
YouTube
to do with the
biplane,
origins of humanity.
and he got to take a ride up on
You
one,
wanna
and it
talk
was
about
70,000
some
feet. It was like,
spiritual faith, which is
it was incredible. I can see the curvature of the earth.
I don't know where you go with that.
That's,
I mean,
yeah, certainly astronauts say you can see it, and people like will say you can see it, but I mean, certainly, okay, this is a conspiracy.
You just stand at chair and
so
say, I can figure this out.
So I can show you this
What are
guy.
the things you can look at?
This is Robert Simmons, who works for NASA, and he made this image here.
That's where I can't go with you. because
And he made it in Photoshop, and you can go to NASA.gov and like look and listen to his own words. Because did you know that from 1972 to 2015, there was only one actual photograph of Earth from space, and that was taken from the Apollo 16, or is it 17?
Well, there's the Apollo 10 and Earthrise. That's one of the best.
Yeah.
And that was Apollo 10.
But so there were a few before
Yeah.
72, but from 72 to 2015, there was only one, and that was the one in 72. Because they came out with these blue marks. But these are composite images. Admittedly, NASA says they're composites.
Yes, because most of the things that we have are not in a position to get the full
I think it would be a
Earth view
mistake.
Yeah.
quality.
But then, so real questions arise when NASA puts out
Yeah, that
The
would
librarian, the library in Alexandria was burned by people who had the
Pictures
same
like
mindset as
this.
Lactantius and Cosmos, that they thought pagan learning was an abomination and should be wiped off the face of the earth. The
So, I
Nazis
mean, to
burned
me,
all
this
those
raises
libraries.
serious concerns about the authenticity of the image of
Yeah,
the
we're
Earth
just
I'm supposed to be
people, you know,
standing
we're
on.
not- we're
Right,
not
and it's
perfect.
like seeing
We
something like that makes
sometimes
you
have the
think
wrong
like,
motivation for
geez,
what we
like
do.
I'm really just taking somebody's total word for like what I think of
It feels like they're the ones who do all,
what we're on.
stuff.
I mean,
Yeah.
look at that.
Okay.
That's
Those
not-
those definitely look like
Feels like they're hiding stuff.
different.
from us.
This one looks
It's
really
crazy.
odd.
It's
Yeah.
showing up like,
If you wanna
So one problem, I mean, obviously
So
the
it's-
continent's way bigger in this one, but the problem is like, so you don't see a pole on the whole globe. Like, North Pole would be behind up here,
What's
but
the
then,
point
so
of
where's the
fooling
South
us into
Pole?
thinking the earth is round?
and
So-
like each of the
Benefit
pictures
from
have their own set of
And
problems.
how?
It's
Yeah.
like,
Tell
So
me.
it's these problems that lead people to say, okay, I'm gonna look into this more, and I gotta tell you, I looked into this, and you find out that all these pictures from Earth, they're not real, and they even admit it. And then once you look at the moon landing, and if you,
My favorite was Buzz Aldrin, who punched the guy
Oh,
who
yeah.
tried because
have you seen
he's
that?
been up there.
this is another weird one. If you're interested in astronomy, okay, Polaris and the constellations never
I
change
agree with you
relative to each
completely.
other,
I
but
think
we're
children
supposed
should
to
all in
think this,
school learn how
going around
to
the sun
assess
while the sun
knowledge
goes-
claims.
you know,
And
it's just
I think one
Yeah.
of the
these
things.
I mean,
unimaginable
see-
different motions. This
Well,
only shows one motion.
Well, yeah, that's a partial evening picture
Does this
set
make
on-
sense with other things?
But the
set around Polaris. So you're really
I don't know where.
you're getting
If I could do this
the
off the top of my
motion
head,
of
I would
the
figure out
rotation of the
Axial
Earth.
rotation. But what about the revolution around the sun?
Again, those are in the course of a few hours, you're not going to be able to notice that.
Yeah,
But
but
how about
every
ever?
night after night for
You will not,
centuries, the
sure,
stars, the
because you can,
constellations are.
have you ever heard of Barnard's Star?
Those people meaning
No.
the people who-
It's the star, I believe, Barnard's Star, that's the one with the highest degree of parallax, right? Which is,
Largest parallax would be Alpha Centauri.
oh, right.
It's hard to know what's true and
So,
what's not
so
sometimes.
Yeah.
stars where they,
No doubt.
you look at this star, you point your telescope at a star in
I
winter
know.
and in summer,
Whether we
or,
can
or
get past
you're looking at the same patch of sky,
We're never
right?
gonna have a uniform
Well,
But-
it'd be a different patch if it was.
No, you
Say,
point at the
does
same.
that camera belong to somebody?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna need to be closing up
Okay.
here
Yeah.
in just a few
If-
minutes, so
if you
unless
look
you
at-
wanna leave
if
it
you
here,
point
I'll ask you to
at the
pack it up.
same
I didn't even mention this.
Same
I did
spot of
this in the 1960s.
sky.
I believe there's
Uh,
a-
So a different constellation then?
No. The same.
Oh, so a different
this-
time of day it would be, yeah.
Yeah, it's different time, different half a year around.
To me, that's-
So the idea is the Earth is on one side of the sun versus the other.
Okay.
You can see a relative motion of the stars based off of parallax.
That's something, that's a test I could do? Or is it have to be
If
necessary?
you've got a good enough astronomical camera, you could probably do it as,
Because nobody in history was able to do that until 1800, so it seems like it would be difficult.
Very difficult task.
you
I just wanna
you
understand
want
everyone's
good camera, good magnification, probably the
Because parallax was the reason that everybody thought that the Earth was not moving, because there was no
because
parallax.
they couldn't notice it.
Yeah.
They needed higher magnification and the right star, the more clear stars to look at, the right ones.
Yeah.
But so when you see the change from half a year to the other when you're looking at the star, but then like half a year later it's back where it was the first time, right? Because so the constellations though, isn't that weird that they're everything's expanding in different directions?
That you've got
all...
it's a three-dimensional thing. It's like, have you noticed you cover one eye or the other, you see a little shift.
But so
In this case, because the distances are big, you use the
Spaceplace talks and learn more about
spring, the winter versus summer. Probably easiest to do in spring and fall because you've got similar amounts of dark.
But so Orion.
That's okay.
Do you know what
But so Orion is going to set tonight in the same place on the horizon that it's going to set every night forever. If you factor in precession, which you're not really able to observe,
Well,
then
no, I'm not talking precession. I mean,
I don't want to see your evidence. I just.
And so, yeah, it began with the spinning Earth going 1,000 miles per hour, which is then circling around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour, which then they decided the sun wasn't a heliocentric model, but more of an acentric model, where they don't know where the center is, and we're just exploding out of a big bang. So the sun, we're spinning around the sun, and then the sun and us are spinning around the Milky Way galaxy, they say, at 500,000 miles per hour. And then the entire Milky Way galaxy, they say, is shooting off from the Big Bang at 670 million miles per hour, almost the speed of light. So there's at least 4 rip-raging, contradictory motions supposedly going at all times, yet you don't experience any of it, nor can you measure any of it using the stars.
There's something not helpful, and maybe even dangerous, today, to assert this sort of sovereignty over UAE. We live in a time when it's more important than ever that we understand what's going on the Earth. If you are not motivated to learn this stuff and feel compelled to dismiss it because it would be too difficult for you to learn it, and then assert that what you know is just as valid as what experts know. If you are willing to do what some creationists in Texas do, they call it standing up to the experts.
This town is full of globins. Someone is always upside down. Curiosity is hard.
sky is deep black.
Thinking caps lying on the ground.
You can see the stars.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, and
You can drive to the stars in a car. That's what you wanna believe. You better turn the key. Ooh, ooh. You better turn the key.
pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
Stick it in there.
What might be called the epistemological sovereignty of the individual. That the space program is a total fraud.
Everybody dreams of the pinata. Everyone they fight to take a swing. But the one who climbed up on the ladder is the one who gets to be the king. We can go to the great beyond with the flick of a magic wand without leaving the line. Ooh, ooh, ooh. We never leave the line. Sure we can leave. That's what you wanna believe. That's what you wanna believe. You better turn the key. You better turn the key. Get your water from the faucet. You get your fruit from a store. It doesn't even matter if it's rotten. If it's rotten to the core. Or you can drive to the stars in a car. If that's what you wanna believe, you better turn that key. Ooh, ooh, you better turn that key. Ooh, ooh, go on, turn that key.